I don't think a lot of people do. And the truth is that I don't think that society at large sees a large difference. The reason why I don't think that people see a large difference is that I've never seen a large-scale consumer shift to where consumers are purchasing something that is more inconvenient or more expensive because of the way that it's produced. Now, some people do this. I'm not arguing that nobody does this. But the biggest companies in the world are oftentimes the most immoral ones. And I think that there's a reason for that. It's because people don't really care where their products come from. Like, nobody really cares about Amazon workers pissing in bottles. You care about it, but would you want to pay twice as much for Amazon Prime to fix it? No, probably not. And the same thing's true with phone batteries. The same thing is true with electronic car batteries. The same thing is true with clothes. And everybody just forgoes morality to participate in these things.
Now that was, in case you didn't recognize the voice, Asmongold addressing a certain issue. For the full context, and I don't normally cover e-drama, but I think this topic goes well beyond e-drama, Asmongold made some statements to the effect of, as you just heard, that consumers just don't care where their art comes from, and expanded a little bit beyond that to the extent that he talked about Amazon workers pissing in bottles and whether or not people would want to pay twice as much for the same service. And the reason I'm covering this is because it touches upon some deeply evolved evolutionary principles, which I'll get into later. But let me say at the outset that I have a great deal of admiration for Asmongold. He was born with a fantastic personality in as much as he's incredibly resilient and intelligent, though it's his resilience that I admire the most. He shrugs everything off as if it were nothing. His mother died, and despite being close to her, he got back to work relatively quickly afterwards and never batted an eyelash. He just takes blows and nothing really affects him, and that's not a quality I have, so I admire him for that. But I think at times people can perceive that as a certain harshness and indifference and or a brashness that a lot of people don't like. But the reality here, in his statement and more broadly, is that he is telling it like it is. Human beings operate a certain way, and oftentimes we as human beings would prefer that we be different, that we behave differently, that the world might be different. Very few of us want to die, for example, but eventually we all have to go. There are innumerable examples of things that we wish were different, but unfortunately are not. And Asmongold, hardened as he is, simply states the truth. But what I really want to focus on is the human psychology here and what's at play, namely people's indifference to the source of their products. And you could go as far as pretty much anything, but an example I like to bring up, and something I talked about 10 years ago, in fact, was the example of conflict minerals. Now, conflict minerals, in case you're not aware, are these minerals largely in Africa, but not exclusively. We can talk about it in a bit. And sometimes they're referred to as the 3 T's: tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold, which doesn't start with a T, but nonetheless is part of that. And all these minerals are used for very important products and objects in the world that we inhabit, namely things related to electronics, phone batteries, which he brought up, various forms of circuitry, motherboards, computer components, and so on and so forth. And so, inevitably, your computer, your phone, your device will require the addition of some of these minerals in order to make it work and be the thing that you've grown accustomed to and appreciate. The problem is that it's almost impossible to know as a consumer where these minerals are being sourced from. Whence the name conflict minerals, the term deriving from the fact that the profits made from these minerals in many countries, say in Africa and Congo, are used for nefarious purposes such as the prosecution of war, the exploitation of minors, and the wee ones in the form of labor that used to exist way back in the day where you have no choice or forced to participate. If you get my drift, theft, the slaying of human beings, and general destruction. And it's not always the case. There are other places that have these minerals. In the Iberian Peninsula, for example, i.e. within Portugal and Spain, You will find copious amounts of tungsten, useful in Australia, in the west of Australia specifically. You have a lot of gold. And so many of these minerals can be sourced from places that would not be subject to the conflict mineral definition, but you don't know that, and you cannot know that. Meaning there's some unknown percentage, a non-zero chance, that the minerals that have gone into your device, your phone, your computer, your battery, whatever it might be, have been taken and sourced from a place like Congo, a place where there is a lot of conflict, where actually, in order to procure some of these minerals, youths and wee ones are exploited in the worst way possible, if you can imagine what I'm talking about, so that we in the West might enjoy our fancy products. And I made the point almost 10 years ago that people are essentially piteously indifferent to this situation. And to get back not just to Asmund's point here, but a broader point he's made throughout the years, is that people don't really care about something unless it affects them. And so you bring up the example of Amazon employees pissing in bottles a couple of years ago, or the harshness of, say, clothing manufacturing overseas. And the reality is, as he says, wholly in agreement, and it's factual, it maps onto human reality, it maps onto human behavior, that the vast majority of us aren't really bothered by that. Would you rather pay $10 for a shirt or $20 for a shirt? Would you rather pay $50 for a product at Amazon or $100? And here's the real kicker, the real question. Would you rather have a smartphone or a PC, or, based on the non-zero chance / probability that some people, including adults, youths, and wee ones, were exploited in ways you can scarcely imagine, and that these products that you're using have the trickle-down effect that it fuels conflict in places like Africa, leading to untold misery, death, and destruction? Would you rather not have your fancy phone and your computer, or alternatively, pay an incredibly high premium, say, on ethically sourced minerals? That sort of thing does exist. It's a bit complicated. Or would you, in the West, be it in Europe, be it in North America, rather accept the consequences of the products that you're enjoying and appreciate? Namely, that you are potentially causing, indirectly, contributing, at the very least, to some of the worst forms of human exploitation that exist, and to the general destruction of the people in that area. How many people do you think would actually forego their PCs, their mobile phones, in order to prevent that non-zero chance that such a thing occurred? I think the number of people, there will be some, is vanishingly small. Because ultimately this all goes back to this notion that people don't care about where their art comes from with respect to AI. And there's a small contingent of artists online, this is mostly virtue signaling, as it always is, who are calling people who don't care about this unethical. Well, my question to them would be, how many of them would forego the use of their phones and computers and technology in order to prevent the worst forms of human exploitation you can imagine in a place such as Congo? No, I'm not talking about pissing in bottles. Use your imagination. There are far worse things. Because the only way you can guarantee that that's not happening is by not using these products. Will they? Or is this just particular to their own, nothing wrong with that, self-interest? If you're an artist, a human artist that is, you have a self-interest to be, in theory, because there are other ways artists can make use of and exploit AI, separate discussion, you have the self-interest to be against AI and to prevent its spread. The knock-on effects of chastising other people for making use of this are, frankly speaking, silly. We all make use of products that we would otherwise not want to forego using for the simple reason that we want to have them. Yes, I will state, I am perfectly okay with a non-zero chance that people I don't know on a different continent are being exploited and suffering in some of the worst ways humanly possible, as long as I get to keep my PC. That might make me seem monstrous, but at least I'm being honest. The vast majority of people out there are the same. They don't care. Now, the real question is, Why they don't care? Well, it seems obvious, but every explanation you would give in this context would be a proximal explanation, meaning it makes sense. Asmongold has cited the example of some 38-year-old with a stressful job and a million different problems. He's not going to be worried about games being overpriced or AI art or this sort of thing. Yes, that's a proximal explanation. But in order to understand the deeper roots of this, our pitiless indifference to the plight of others far away, or even those not so far away, we need to understand what we ultimately are. We are animals that seek to propagate our DNA. And from this, all things follow. We have a primary interest in our kin and our sense of obligation to them, usually those who are genetically related to us. This is not universal because you can have strained relations, and sometimes blood turns out to be not very thick indeed. There are examples of this. We're talking about exceptions, though. Generally speaking, people are interested in those related to them and their immediate friend circles. Now, friends might not be directly related to you, but they can aid you in survival, in theory. They can aid you in moving along in life and propagating your DNA. Now, the most recent explanation for this, offered by the British anthropologist Robin Dunmar, is something called Dunmars Number. I talked about Dunmars Number, unsurprisingly, almost 10 years ago, and I've talked about it on occasion on this channel, but that is a limiting factor in terms of the number of people you can know, i.e. be familiar with, and actually care about. And he, through a combination of observation of other primates, human beings, and neuroimaging, came to the conclusion that it's about 150 individuals that we can know and care about to some degree. But even within that 150, there are different layers. So he might say something like the tightest circle of people being your kin, your genetic relatives, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, maybe your cousin, in some cases friends. And then the layers that follow it, say your good friends, very close friends maybe. Then you have more superficial friendships. Then you have maybe a bunch of so-called meaningful contacts. Then you have acquaintances. And then you have another bunch of people that you kind of vaguely recognize. Now, somewhere within these different layers is a limit, and to be more specific, the hard limit of how many individuals within that circle of vague to extreme familiarity you can actually care about, meaning you care about their well-being, their welfare, their state of mind, etc., etc. So a theoretical example, to use this sort of by five principle, is there are five people, say your kin, your brother, your sister, your grandmother, your mother, your father, that you're quote-unquote closest to and that mean the most to you. Then there might be something like 10 to 15 really good friends, 50 to 100 more superficial friends. And then you start getting into this meaningful contact area where you don't really care about them, but they're useful to you. And that's how it kind of works. Now, some people contest this number of 150. Some people claim it's as high as 300. But there's no contention in the sense that we are limited by our cognitive capacity in how many people we can know, be familiar with, and most importantly, care about. So the vast majority of us would accept the worst forms of human exploitation out there if that exploitation was only being applied to strangers we don't know on a different continent in order to enjoy our electronic products, our games, our PCs, and so on and so forth. But if it were a sister or brother, we'd be very disturbed. So here's a hypothetical. Let's say every time you buy a PC component or you want to build a PC or you buy a phone, there is a 25% chance that some of the parts that went into this product were sourced from conflict minerals, and that the proceeds went to some local warlord that did the worst things possible to human beings. What if there were a 25% chance that your sibling, your brother or sister, could suffer a similar fate? Again, imagine the worst forms of exploitation and suffering and put it in the context of your family. If you bought PC components or a smartphone, every time you did that, there was a 25% chance. Most people would think twice about that. Most people would be very concerned that that risk, even though it's not that high, it's only 25% at the end of the day, 75% chance nothing happens. Most people, I maintain, would be concerned if it were about their sister or brother. And perhaps in similar fashion, maybe slightly less, if it were a close friend, one of that inner circle of friends. The further you move away from this, the less concerned you are. Now here's another hypothetical. Let's say there's an Amazon warehouse in Texas, but you live in Wisconsin or New York or Maine, and there's a similar practice there. There's a 25% chance that in various warehouses in Texas, Amazon employees were being similarly exploited and suffering in ways similar to those human beings in conflict mineral areas. How many people do you think in these other states far away would be so concerned about their welfare that they would either be willing to forego the product entirely or pay something like triple or quadruple the price on said products? I think most people still would want the product, even if there were a chance that their so-called fellow Americans were being exploited in ways that only exist in third world countries such as Congo in the context of conflict minerals. Now, in the context of the United States, there would be legal action, obviously, because that would be a violation of the law. But would people really be bothered by it? Probably not. Unless they were related to them, they were friends, maybe neighbors. Again, we're talking about the capacity to know, be familiar, and actually care about people, which is a function of our brain size, and the limitations of our brain. There's only so much space in our brains to be familiar with such people. Had we evolved in a different situation, in a different environment, where we had different brains and we had tens of thousands of individuals that were connected to, society would look very, very different today. As I say constantly, and I've said for over a decade, we are the byproducts of a very long evolutionary process. We are animals. We have not changed that much. We've changed somewhat, but not that much. And the core principles that informed our behavior, say 50, 100,000 years ago, are still very much present right now, and they are constantly being reiterated, albeit in a different context, that is often, as I've stated many times as well, veiled by the comfort of modernity, veiled by the illusions that we weave within the context of our so-called society. Everyone would like to think of themselves as a virtuous, good person, but the vast, vast, vast majority of us are not. I'm not a particularly ethical person. Like I said, I don't care enough about strangers in Africa such that I'm willing to forego my PC or similar products. And I'm going to assume, you might be offended, that you're quite similar as well. I think most of us are like that. And the same holds true for AI art. It is a small contingent of people who are claiming the moral high ground, but ultimately, consumers don't care, and it all goes back to our evolutionary origins. We are not wired to care about people in distant lands, people we don't know, or their welfare. The illusion that we do is a byproduct that has been manufactured online in places like X, formerly known as Twitter, of people who want a virtue signal. But the reality is that I'm willing to bet money that almost none of those artists complaining about people's use of AI or companies' use of AI for art would be willing to forego their PCs, their electronics, in order to save a couple of children in Africa. They would not. They're willing to buy the products despite the almost certainty that some of those components were sourced vis-a-vis conflict minerals, i.e. some of the worst forms of human exploitation out there, and imagine words that I am frankly not allowed to say on YouTube. Imagine that happens in these areas, and they would be willing to countenance that. I am 99% sure of it. Those artists who are claiming that the rest of us are immoral for using AI art, etc., do all kinds of things that are immoral. Are all of them like that? No. There might be people out there, I'm very skeptical that there are, who are willing to forego every product that seems even vaguely unethical. Somebody finds out today that their PC has been sourced using conflict minerals, and they just forsake using a PC for the rest of their lives, right? Those people exist. The numbers, though, of such people are vanishingly small. 99% plus of people are not like that. Asmongold is right about people, and this is simply a matter of people not liking reality. Reality can at times be deeply, deeply unpleasant, and this is one of the many unpleasantries in the world. If I'm suffering as an individual and there's some problem I have, I cannot reasonably expect strangers to care about me. I can't even reasonably expect my friends to care about me, and that's just how it is. So Dunbar's number, that upper limit, cognitive limit, to be very specific, of how many people we can know and care about, and the general self-serving nature of human beings being DNA replicators like any other animal on Earth. We care about what we care about. And that's just the way it is. As always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons and people on PayPal who donate. You guys are the best. Keep the channel alive. Without you, all would be dust and ash. As for everybody else, if you can leave a comment, share, subscribe. If you've not yet subscribed, be much appreciated. Apparently, it helps out with the channel. Yet to be proven. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out next time. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.